Well, hello, Sisters Unbothered. Welcome back. This is Phase 1, Week 2. I am Coach Nikki Cates, Transformation Strategist, and we are still unmasking through the Unbothered Resistance and Sisters Unbothered. Now, what we're going to be talking about this week, first, let's remember that Phase 1 is completely focused on the concept of the performance of survival. This is where we are talking about why we mask, and most of the time that is for some form of survival in the world that we live in. And last week we talked about specifically how we learn to wear the mask, and we talked about some of the factors that would throw us into a space where we would feel the need to mask ourselves. What do we mean by mask? We talked about last week that masking is any type of false narrative or facade that has to be put on, a layer applied on top of who you actually are, your authentic self, your God-given self, in order to survive in the world. As a woman, sometimes we have to be more masculine, or we feel like we have to be extra feminine, right? That could be considered masking. Obviously, being a different person depending on the environment that you are in, that is considered masking, or wearing sometimes even like a costume where we're actually playing to be somebody else instead of who we actually are. For whatever reason, we don't think we're going to be acceptable. We don't think that we're going to be able to please people. And that's what we want to do, is people please. We don't think that we're going to meet the norm of that environment. And so there's just so many ways that we do this. The I'm fine mask. I'm strong. I got this. I don't need nobody. All of these different things. If you have not watched the replay of the coaching session from last week, I encourage you to do so, because myself and one of your fellow Sisters Unbothered, Charlicia Johnson, joined me, and we had a very good conversation about what this looks like in everyday life. And she even gave her perspective as well. So I want you to check that out. And as we move forward into this next week, I just want you to remember to take into consideration that all true transformation starts from within, above and within. Above and within. It is whatever is above you that you can't change, it's above you, sis. You can't change it. Stop stressing yourself out about it. That's why perfection is impossible. But what you can do is work on yourself. And I'm not talking about fixing yourself. I'm talking about doing the work to love yourself, to find your healing, to begin your healing journey, to stay on it, to become your better self so that you can be better for those around you. That's what life is really supposed to be about. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. This week we're talking about performing strength, from performing strength to practicing softness. Okay? I did a blog post and it was about the strong Black woman being tired. Why are we so exhausted? Because we live by a particular script that is expected of us to be strong and to be for everybody, everything, and not require that in return for ourselves. That's why we're tired. And that looks so many different ways in a professional environment, in the domestic environment, in the marketplace, in the church, in the community. Girl, you know what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and let's jump right on it. All right, as we are starting out with week 2, phase 1, week 2, actually, we are going to stick to this unmasking framework where the U is to uncover the lies that we have been told and believed. Then we are going to name our patterns. N, M, move through the wilderness with grace. We're not beating ourselves up at what we come face to face with. If we encounter truths, if we realize that what we thought were truths were actually lies, if we come to realizations that we just did not know, I want you to remember to give yourself grace. And we give each other grace. Why? Because we all do the best that we can in the moment that we are in. Okay? Then we are going to align with our true, authentic selves, the self that God created and put into this earth that intended for you to be before the world got to you. Okay? S, surrender the outcomes. All right? We're not here worrying about what someone else going to think because you made a decision to be authentic. That's above you. Okay? You're focusing on ourself right now, prioritizing ourself. S is surrender the outcomes. K is keep cultivating the truth, God's truth and your truth. Okay? Because those truths are finite. The world is constantly changing. Even something solid like science or mathematics, y'all, they still find out new things. It's never totally solid, unchanging. But the word of God never changes. And who you are and what your truth is on the inside of you, the life that you've lived, that is your truth. That is what you know to be true. And I encourage you to keep cultivating your truth. E is embodying the transformation. Okay? Receive it and walk in it, sis. 10 toes down. D, declare your calling boldly. All right? So, how are we applying that to this week's topic? We are going to talk more about this concept of the Black woman, strong Black woman script. Now, last week we discussed Melissa Harris Perry's book, Sister Citizen, and we talked about stereotypes that are placed upon Black women. So I want to have a little bit more of a conversation about that concept, how far back that joint goes, and its impact on us for generation after generation after generation. And then I would like for us to reflect and examine our own relationships with what strength is and what vulnerability is, because vulnerability can feel like a weakness. Okay? And strength a lot of times feels like what you absolutely have no choice but to be. But there is a time and a season for everything, y'all. Going back to the word of God, which is solid, absolute truth. The word of God says that there's a time and a season for everything, right? There's a time to sleep and a time to be awake. There's a time to speak and a time to be silent. There's a time to spend and a time to save. There is a time for you to be strong and there is a time for you to be vulnerable. Okay? Embody, practicing new ways of being that honor your whole self. We're talking about holistic being here in Sisters Unbothered. The only way to truly be unbothered in this world, especially the crazier that it gets, is to have a holistic approach to your healing and to how you move in this world. If you are aware of what's going on the inside of you, you have more power about how do you respond and react to what's going on the outside of you. Okay? The world wants us to think the other way around. But I am telling you, and I'm reminding you, because I think you already know this, what's going on the inside is more powerful. Okay? And then implementing specific practices to sustain your transformation. So this week, going off of our worksheets, let me pull mine up right quick. Going off of our worksheet for this week, you have journaling prompts, but you also have a performance audit. And we give you an example of a table. And I am encouraging you to not only sit down and think this through and write these new affirmations, but begin to apply them as you move forward. Say these affirmations to yourself for the next 30 days, or is it 21 days to establish a habit? And when you do the performance audit, receive it. If you've been honest with yourself, sis, receive it. Take it in as data, not to beat yourself up or make yourself feel bad, and then focus on your true need or desire. Because when you focus from that space instead of the mask, you will begin to feel more fulfilled and you'll be more in tune with what's going to allow you to remain fulfilled as you implement this new process of showing up differently in the world. I hope this is making sense. But what I'm encouraging y'all to do as we're going through this training is consider what we're talking about, and then also consider what you'd like to bring to the conversation on Thursday or Saturday. Okay? All right, moving on to the next slide. Let's get it, girl. All right, so one of the key concepts of coaching is reframing. What does that mean? That means when you come to a new way of thinking, a mindset shift, a new perspective, that you reframe the way you've been perceiving and thinking about things with that new concept. All right. So this week we want to focus on emotionally that this week can be uncomfortable, but it's about you telling yourself the truth. Why do I say it could be uncomfortable? We talked about this on Saturday because character development is uncomfortable. Seeing who you really are, how people really see you, and what life is really telling you, and what your emotions have been trying to indicate to you can be uncomfortable. But it's a good discomfort because it's stretching you and it's helping you to grow. So these are discomforts that we want to have because many people do not grow from the inside out because they don't want to go through that discomfort. Okay? So I want you to remember this week, if you feel discomfort as you are considering the masks that you are wearing, or even if you decide to take one of those off, even just for a day to see what happens, remember that you are realizing truths instead of lies. Our core focus is that we are unlearning, because remember, that's what Sisters Unbothered is about. Unlearning, deconstructing, relearning, and rebuilding or restoring. Okay? So this week we're unlearning the myth of the strong Black woman because she is, in fact, exhausted. Okay? And our new narrative is that I deserve more than applause for my pain. I deserve more than applause for my pain. We are praised for the sacrifices that we make to be the strong Black woman that holds it all together. But who is comforting us when we need to lick our wounds? Who is comforting us when we feel like we're falling apart and we're crying ourselves to sleep because we're that exhausted? Who's going to give us some relief when we can't take another step and we're forced to do it anyway? These are things that we need to consider, because if you never take off the mask and you never allow yourself to show up as a woman that has needs, no one is going to know they need to show up for you. And then you'll never know who actually will show up until you give them an opportunity to do so. Okay? So we are changing the way we think. We are unlearning and relearning, sis. Let's move on. Let's go back to my story. Now, if you are reading Reciprocity Eludes Me, then you are already very familiar with this, but it's also outlined in the playbook as well. But at the time that I wrote this book, I was not familiar with this concept of unmasking. But I did talk about this in my speech when I was speaking about unmasking. So let's just kind of briefly cover this real quick, because I've talked about this several times and I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, as the saying goes. But the truth is, y'all, remember, repetition is what helps us to remember. So continuing to say certain things over and over helps us to remember. It helps it to be planted. The seed is sown, and then you continue to water it until it finally sprouts the ground and you know you've got it. Okay? So talking real quick about this concept of masking for survival. In my story, I talk from the beginning about self-hate, because for me, self-hate and self-neglect were the fruit of my current personal perspective and my mindset. And what I began to do, instead of dealing with that, is cover that up with the mask that I'm fine, I'm strong, I don't need your approval, I don't need your help, I'm going to just go out here and do what I need to do to make happen what I need to make happen. But the cost of that was that so many people were depending on me. I was carrying so many people on my back, emotionally, sometimes mentally. Sometimes it felt like it was physically, that I was constantly throwing myself into burnout seasons. Not even that. I was living in a state of running on fumes, continuing to try and pour from an empty cup that was bone dry. Now, granted, once I turned my life back over to Christ, His Spirit helped me to no longer go bone dry, but I was still spent. I was still overworked, overexhausted, overthinking, over everything, y'all. But the truth is that I learned how to survive by being the strong one. Okay? That way, my feelings didn't have to get hurt and I didn't have to keep being rejected, even though I still was, y'all. But in my mind, I wouldn't have to keep being rejected by being needy because I was the one that people came to when they needed. I had to learn how to heal from the inside out by actually being seen for who I really was. I had to admit that I was falling apart. I had to admit that I couldn't do it anymore. I had to admit that I just didn't have the energy or even the desire. I had to admit that something was wrong in order to go to therapy. I had to admit that I can't live my life in this way. I need to change something. Of course, we all know that it wasn't something, it was someone being me, because once I began to do the work to live differently, everyone else around me began to do the same because I showed up different. And that is the truth that I've had to learn. It starts with our mindset and our perspective. And that's why the Bible tells us that we need to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. It all starts in our souls, y'all. The Bible tells us we have to ask the Lord because He is the one that is merciful and makes our soul well. That is a process we have to choose, but it doesn't start until you take off all these false personas and facades and costumes and hats and masks and even some of these roles we take on. Okay? All right, moving on. All right, y'all, let's talk a little bit about this concept of deconstructing. Because if we think about where the origins of this strong Black woman trope came from, then we can begin to see it for what it really is. Now, I believe that this goes all the way back to the slavery times. I believe that the strong Black woman originates from what Black women had to do, African American women, what they had to do to survive. I can't even fathom what my ancestors had to endure. I wouldn't have made it. Personally, I don't think I would have made it. My grandfather was very clear to me in the rural back country of South Carolina that I wouldn't have made it. Because I wasn't about to break the neck of a chicken. I wasn't about to pluck no feathers. I hated watering the hogs. Okay? I didn't want to get out in the garden. I was terrified of snakes. I didn't want to have anything to do with any of that. But this was the land that my people lived on, tilled the ground, raised the food, right? So I believe him. But to be honest with you, my daughters can't fathom living the life that I lived. And they ask me often how I did it. And my response is always the same, because I had to. Our ancestors, they didn't want to be strong Black women. They had to be. And then you follow that on up through the sharecropping years, through Jim Crow, through the civil rights movement. I was just reading, last night I'm reading a couple of Bell Hooks books, And she was talking about how, like, even in the civil rights movement, Black women were face to face with the fact that you we couldn't just be Black. We were women too. And it was made very clear that the patriarchy was very much alive even amongst Black men, and that there was an expectation that you are a woman, not just Black. However, then you go to Angela Davis, where she's talking about feminism in Black women. And what happens there? There, you're not just a woman, but you're also Black. So that intersectionality always plays a part, y'all. It always plays a part. But then it adds additional layers to the expectations that are placed upon us to be strong. Because we're supposed to be able to endure the unfairness that is put upon us based off of those layers. And we are not supposed to complain, and we are not supposed to do anything but continue to comply, even when that means disregarding our own needs. Okay? So, what's the truth of that? The truth is that, yeah, that trope didn't start with us. It was handed down, it was normalized. Heck, it was even spiritualized. How many of y'all grew up in the church? You know what I'm talking about. But God doesn't require our performance. He meets us in our truth. Just like I talked about a few weeks ago, I'm going to make sure I put the link for a previous teaching that I did. We were talking about Hagar. I want you to go back and check that out, okay? Where God met her where she was in her truth. That's what he wants to do for us. But being strong Black women has become so normalized. It's an absolute expectation on the job, in business, amongst our own people, in the community, in the church, in our homes. It is a normalized standard that this is how we are going to respond, or the angry Black woman, right? So we know that this is a standard, but that doesn't mean that we have to live by that standard. That is not God's intention for us. What is the cost? What do we sacrifice to maintain that image? Now we have this movement where we want a soft life. We sacrifice that softness for survival, sis. But until you allow yourself to take off these masks of survival, finding that place of softness, you towards yourself first, and then allowing yourself to be vulnerable to the right people, others, then you can begin to change that image. Now you can be soft and strong. That's not what was normalized for us, but we can change that norm, sis, because we are change agents up in here and Sisters Unbothered, okay? So this week, I want you to name it. And then I want you to grieve what you sacrificed to be strong and survive, instead of allowing yourself to be soft where you need it to be. Then I want you to start reclaiming your softness, reclaiming your authenticity. Okay? That is the beginning of deconstruction. You need to see what the truth is. You need to make a reckoning with it. And then you need to rebuild or relearn. Okay? Moving on. All right, now, you remember as we're talking about this unmasking framework, we want to move through the wilderness with grace. We want to name the patterns. We want to align with our authentic selves. We want to keep cultivating the truth. So, as you are thinking about this topic this week, if you're working through the worksheet or you're journaling from the journaling prompts, or you just want to be still with this and really just think about it and think, where am I not showing up authentically? Where am I saying yes when I should be saying no. Grab your worksheet or your journal and ask yourself, where do I perform strength when I know doggone well that I am not feeling strong? And who benefits from my exhaustion when I have overpoured and completely spent myself? Most of the time, what I've learned after I spent years being angry at people deep down for not seeing that I was exhausted and that I needed love and I needed moments to be soft and vulnerable is that they just didn't think about it because I never expressed it. That's a part of that torch that we hold as strong Black women. But the truth is, that torch will also have us with bad health, dying early, not sticking around to be the best example for our grandchildren. And we don't want to continue that cycle, right, sis? So, in order for us to truly show up unbothered and teach the next generation of women how to also be unbothered in a world where we are expected to be everything to everyone and never be seen and taking care of ourselves, we need to do this audit now, okay? Think about it. Just allow yourself to think about it. Don't beat yourself up. Give yourself grace and just allow yourself to think about the places in your life, in your career, in your service, where you know that some things need to shift within you so that you show up differently and so that people are required to show up in the way that's more beneficial to you. And think about who benefits from your exhaustion, because those are the people that you are going to have to move strategically as you begin to build boundaries around yourself, not to control them, but to protect yourself. Okay? And don't forget to breathe, sis. Sometimes we start doing these things and we just get all tense. Like right now, I'm talking to y'all and I have to loosen my shoulders and roll them a little bit and untense because that's what we do. Okay? But normalize the discomfort of having these types of conversations with yourself and ask the Holy Spirit to step in and help you because He will. Okay? All right, moving on. Remember, we said that we are unlearning and reclaiming, deconstructing and rebuilding. So here is a guide for you as you are considering what it is. First of all, what was the origin for you in particular? For most of us, it was probably the people in our family, the women that we saw in our lives. Like, for instance, me getting out of my marriage, the last marriage, was because I realized I sat and I took an audit of the women in my life and what their relationships looked like. And it was an indicator for me that's not what I want for the rest of my life. And then I made a decision and I stood on it, which was extremely hard because this is where I kind of pushed myself into homelessness for a season and a lot of struggle. However, it was very much so worth it, y'all. But this is my point. I had to recognize what I had already been taught. Not that they taught me it directly by saying it to me, but they taught it to me through their behaviors, through their relationships, the way they showed up in the world, by what they emulated to me. And I see the same in my 4 daughters. I see the bad and I'm seeing the good. So what we have to remember is that we can take the reign in this process right now and say, yes, I was taught that, but I can be this. And it's never too late, no matter how old you are, to come to this realization, show up differently, and help others do the same. Okay? We, as seasoned women, can show up differently at any point and show those that are coming behind us Not only learn what not to do from me, but also learn what to do. And remember, it's never too late. Okay. So we're talking about showing up and being valuable even when we're not always the strong one. I'm still valuable even if I ask somebody else to do something for me. I am still valuable if I delegate. Okay. I am still valuable when I am resting. This Nikki has shifted into a space where I understand that fully, and I might actually take advantage of it more than I should at this point of my life. But there was a day where I didn't feel valuable unless I was trying to please everyone in every way, in every environment. Okay? You are valuable even when you're not being the strong one. Okay? You are valuable even when you're not fine. Okay? You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to have needs. I'm going to say it again. You are allowed to have needs. I came from a mother, love you, mommy, that wouldn't even buy underwear for herself, bras, when I was young. And I did the same thing. Why are my kids decked out and I'm wearing holy underwear, y'all? You might be able to relate. It took a long time for me to understand that I'm better for them when I'm better. Okay? You are allowed to just be. Not be what they want you to be, not what they think you should be, not what the world says you should be, not what you think the church says you should be. You are allowed to be, and God loves you as you are. Okay? That's why we shouldn't judge each other. That's why we should all be humble, because we all are unique in our being and we all have a different journey. What one person is convicted of may not be what the other person is convicted of. Now, granted, there are some situations where you just known you was just flat out wrong. Okay. But again, none of us are perfect. You are allowed to be. You don't need permission. Okay. And finally, begin to develop a habit of asking for help. Begin to develop a habit of delegating. I know how hard it is. I used to be that person. I just wanted to get done right the first time. Do you know how much stuff in my life in this season I overlook because I know it's not what it should be, but at least it got done? Okay. Instead of going behind them and doing it myself, because all of my energy at this point in season in my life is to build, not to keep cleaning up after folks, right? But you have to make that decision for yourself. Where are you not allowing yourself to ask for help? Where are you not saying no? Period. No explanation, no guilt, no shame. Where are you taking rest without having to get permission to do so? And requiring others by setting boundaries to allow you to do this successfully. Okay? Practice this. It takes practice, sis. Go sit somewhere and eat by yourself, girl. Go watch a movie. When I tell you I will go watch a movie with a glass of wine and some french fries and be so happy by myself. But it took practice to get there, okay? So I'm encouraging you to practice, okay? All right, sis. So we are almost to the end of this training. If you've stuck in here this long, I appreciate you and I hope that it is helpful for you along this journey, okay? All right, so if you want to go deeper, I encourage you to complete the worksheet. It was sent in the first email or post that went out for the week on Monday. Then I'd like for you to connect either in the comments or on the live on Thursday evening or Saturday on the coaching call, okay? Or both, or all of the above. I just want to hear from you. I want to hear if the content is helpful. I want to hear if you do the performance audit and if you were able to recognize some patterns and that you were able to do that with grace. instead of beating yourself up, okay? Because when you realize that you've been masking, it can be a bit uncomfortable because you don't realize that you were actually being inauthentic for the dumbest of reasons sometimes. Like why am I hiding who I am for this situation? I know I've had those moments, and it's very common when I'm coaching someone as well. So just keep that in mind, okay? But continue to do this out of love, acceptance for yourself, and for God's will for you, okay? And not just for survival. Do it with grace, do it with kindness, do it with truth, okay? And let me know how I can support you in that process. All right, girl, take a deep breath with me. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds. Ready? Let's go. Now, next time you do this, I want you to breathe in. I want you to say, I am safe to rest. Then you're going to breathe out. I don't have to earn love. You ready? In, I am safe to rest. Out, I don't have to earn love. This is just the beginning of your unlearning. This is not failure. It is not meant to feel messy. This is simply unlearning and relearning so that you can live a life that's more fulfilling and more in alignment who you really are. Okay? So that's the work that is leading to liberation. And that's the way forward towards freedom. Okay? All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. And I will see you on the call this week.